The synoptic gospels have two resuscitation stories. The story of the resuscitation of Jairus' daughter as told by Mark and Matthew and Luke. And Luke has another resuscitation story, the resuscitation of the son of the widow of Nain. The story of the resuscitation of Lazarus is found only in the Gospel of John. The reason why I use the term resuscitation and not raising is because the term raising refers to a new kind of life. What happened with Jesus is that he was raised. Jairus' daughter, the son of the widow of Nain, and Lazarus are resuscitated, which means they will die again when the Lord decides to call them to himself. But Jesus, because he is raised from the dead and not resuscitated, will never die again. This story of the resuscitation of Lazarus is a very, very famous story, and most of us would be aware of it. There are a few points in the story which I would like to highlight for our reflection today. And the first is that the name Lazarus means God helps. And God does indeed help Lazarus through his son. At the outset of the story, we are told that Jesus had a very, very beautiful relationship with the family of Lazarus and his sisters, Martha and Mary. He was friends with them. He would possibly go to visit them on many occasions, share a meal with them, share time with them, talk and dialogue with them. And so while Jesus is still away from Bethany where Lazarus lives, he is told that Lazarus is dead. If Jesus really loved Lazarus, ought he not to have gone immediately? However, the point is that because he loved Lazarus and because he loved others as well, as we shall see later on in the story, he delays his going to Lazarus. Jesus knows in his heart what the Father has given him to do. Jesus knows in his heart that he is the resurrection and the life, and that is why he does not need to rush to the aid of Lazarus. That is why he can tarry. That is why he can give people a message by his remaining where he was and going only when he believes the hour has come, the hour ordained by his Father. As soon as Jesus reaches Bethany and the home of Martha and Mary, Martha comes to him with this request. She knows that God is on Jesus' side. She knows that God will grant to Jesus whatever Jesus asks. And Jesus says to her, your brother will rise again. Jesus does not say that he will rise again on the last day. He does not say he will rise again now. He simply says to Martha, your brother will rise again. Martha is a believer in the resurrection. At the time of Jesus, there was no theology of the resurrection. As a matter of fact, the Sadducees were a group which did not even believe in the resurrection and made a mockery or ridiculed it because according to them, nothing was said in the first 5 books of the Old Testament, beginning from Genesis, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Exodus, that there was anything about the resurrection. And because they believed only the Pentateuch or the Torah as it was called, they would not believe in the resurrection. So there was no clarity about the resurrection. There was only a glimpse which people had. And so Martha responds to the Lord simply on the superficial level that she knows he will rise again, but on the last day. But what that means, she really does not know. Jesus, however, takes her to the deeper level like he always does in his dialogues with people, taking them from the superficial and shallow level to the deeper level when he says, I am the resurrection and the life. And they lead him to the place where Lazarus has been laid. And even though Martha believes that God will grant Jesus whatever he asks, she is scared to roll the stone away. She is scared to roll the stone away because according to her, it has now been 4 days since Lazarus has been laid in the tomb. And even though the body would possibly have been anointed, it is quite likely that after 4 days, there would be a stench, the body would begin to smell, and she voices her opinion. But in doing so, she also voices that she does not really believe that Jesus is the resurrection and the life. John chapter 11 verse 35 is what many consider the shortest verse in the gospel, and it says, Jesus wept. Many mistakenly think that the weeping of Jesus is because Lazarus has died. Jesus knows that he's going to resuscitate Lazarus. So he is not really weeping because Lazarus has died. He is not merely weeping because Lazarus is not with his sisters, Martha and Mary. He is weeping because of the limitation that death has imposed. He is weeping because of the response of people to death. When people face death, their despair. When a loved one dies, we lose hope. When somebody is terminally ill and at the point of death, we ask God to save them. We do not ask God that God's will be done. This is what makes Jesus weep, that he realizes that people are asking for their selfish needs and not for God's will. And so, as soon as he weeps, he gives us the reason for the weeping when he tells his father that he knows that his father is going to grant whatever he asks. That is the confidence, that is the faith he asks in his father. But Jesus makes this prayer aloud and he says it in his prayer for those who are listening, that they might be able to change their perspective of death. They might be able to change their perspective of God. They might be able to change their perspective of the resurrection. And then in regal style, as only Jesus can do, he commands Lazarus to come out. And Lazarus comes out. And Lazarus comes out bound with the cloths. And the reason why I said at the beginning of this homily, it is that it is a resuscitation and not a raising, is because Lazarus brings the cloths out when he comes. And the reason why Lazarus brings the cloths which were used to wrap the body and the head along with him is because Lazarus will die again. And when he dies again, he will need the cloths once again for his burial. In John chapter 20 verses 1 to 10, which is the episode of the empty tomb, when Mary Magdalene, when the beloved disciple and Peter go to the empty tomb, they find that the body of Jesus is not there, but that the cloths have been left behind. Jesus does not take the cloths with him because Jesus has not been resuscitated, but Jesus has been raised from the dead, and Jesus will never die again. And because Jesus will never die again, he can afford to leave the cloths behind. But because Lazarus has only been resuscitated, he will bring the cloths with him. In the first reading from the book of Ezekiel, God tells Ezekiel that he is going to open the graves of the people so that they might receive his spirit, the Spirit of God, and live. This Spirit of God is given through Jesus even to each one of us today, and we need to ask ourselves, whether like Jesus, we will dare to continue to do God's will, even if it means a limitation like death, even if it means a limitation like a terminal illness, even if it means a sickness and being in hospital, or if we will be like Martha and believe only superficially that Jesus is the resurrection and the life, and complain when he is about to open the door of the tomb that there will be a stench. The readings of today invite us to hear these words of Jesus again and again, and not merely to hear them with our ears, but to hear them with our hearts, and to believe with our entire being that our Lord Jesus is not merely a resuscitator. Our Lord Jesus is the risen Lord, the Lord who will raise us as well. So we need to believe in the statement, I am. And I would add, I continue to be, Jesus says, the resurrection and the life.